The morning sun cast long shadows across the grounds of Windsor Castle as Princess Eugenie stepped out of the black limousine, her face pale and drawn with exhaustion. The past 48 hours had been a whirlwind of emotions, protocol, and heartbreak that no amount of royal training could have prepared her for. The weight of loss hung heavy in the air, and the usually vibrant princess moved with the careful deliberation of someone trying to hold herself together. Prince Andrew emerged from the vehicle behind her, his weathered face showing the strain of recent events. As her father, he had always been her protector, but today he felt the helplessness that comes with watching your child suffer and knowing that some pain cannot be shielded away. His own grief was pushed aside as he focused entirely on being the support his daughter desperately needed. The sight that greeted them was both beautiful and heartbreaking. Thousands upon thousands of flowers had been laid by members of the public, creating a sea of color that stretched as far as the eye could see. Roses, lilies, carnations, and simple wildflowers picked from gardens formed a carpet of tribute. Among the blooms were handwritten cards, children's drawings, and small personal items left by people who had never met the deceased, but felt compelled to share in the collective mourning. Eugenie's breath caught in her throat as she took in the magnitude of public affection displayed before them. The sheer volume of flowers seemed to represent every life that had been touched, every heart that was now broken. She had expected crowds, she had expected media attention, but she had not been prepared for this overwhelming display of love and sympathy from complete strangers. Andrew placed a gentle hand on his daughter's elbow, guiding her toward the flower beds. He could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she held herself too rigidly, fighting against the emotion that threatened to overwhelm her. Years of public appearances had taught both of them to maintain composure under scrutiny, but this was different. This was personal grief playing out on a public stage. The other members of the royal family had already begun their own slow procession through the tributes. Each face reflected the same mixture of sorrow and gratitude for the public's response. The younger royals, in particular, seemed to struggle with the formality required of them when all they wanted was to grieve privately like any normal family. As they walked deeper into the sea of flowers, Eugenie began to read some of the messages aloud in a whisper. "Thank you for your service," she read from a card attached to a bunch of white roses. "You will never be forgotten," said another, written in a child's careful handwriting and decorated with colorful hearts. The princess's composure began to crack as she read message after message of love and condolence. These were not just empty platitudes from obligated subjects, but genuine outpourings of grief from people who had been personally affected. There were stories of inspiration, tales of lives changed, and simple expressions of gratitude that spoke to the deep connection between the royal family and the people they served. Andrew watched his daughter carefully, recognizing the signs that she was approaching her emotional limit. He had seen her struggle through difficult times before, but this public display of grief was testing her in ways that private family moments never could. The presence of cameras and onlookers meant that every tear, every moment of weakness would be captured and analyzed. The wind picked up slightly, causing some of the lighter flowers to shift and rustle, creating a sound like gentle whispers among the tributes. It was as if the flowers themselves were speaking, carrying messages of comfort and love from those who had left them. Eugenie paused at a particularly touching display where someone had arranged flowers to spell out words of love and remembrance. As they continued their walk, other family members joined them in small groups. Conversations were hushed and brief, each person dealing with their grief in their own way while maintaining the dignity expected of their position. The weight of public responsibility felt heavier than ever as they balanced their private pain with their duty to acknowledge and appreciate the public show of support. The mourning progressed slowly, with each step through the flowers bringing new waves of emotion. For Eugenie, every beautiful arrangement was both a comfort and a reminder of what had been lost. The kindness of strangers was overwhelming, but it also emphasized the finality of their situation. These flowers would eventually wilt and fade, but the memories they represented would remain forever. Andrew stayed close to his daughter throughout the morning, ready to offer support whenever she needed it. He could see her struggling to maintain her composure as they encountered particularly moving tributes. His role as both a father and a member of the royal family required him to balance his natural protective instincts with the need to allow his daughter to fulfill her public duties. The afternoon brought no relief from the emotional intensity of the morning. If anything, as more family members arrived to view the tributes, the atmosphere became even more charged with grief and tension. Princess Eugenie had managed to maintain her composure through the first few hours, but the accumulation of heartfelt messages and the constant presence of cameras was beginning to wear on her resolve. Prince Andrew noticed the subtle changes in his daughter's demeanor as the day progressed. Her steps had become more measured, her responses to well-wishers more automatic, and there was a glassy quality to her eyes that suggested she was fighting back tears. He had seen the same look on her face during other difficult family moments, and he knew that she was reaching her breaking point. The crowd of onlookers had grown throughout the day, with people arriving to pay their respects and hoping to catch a glimpse of the royal family during this moment of vulnerability. The security detail worked efficiently to maintain appropriate distances while still allowing the family to interact meaningfully with the public displays of affection. Among the newer arrivals were several elderly individuals who had been personally affected by the royal family's work over the years. One woman, leaning heavily on a walking stick, had traveled from Scotland specifically to lay flowers and share her gratitude for years of public service. Her presence among the tributes served as a powerful reminder of the long-lasting impact of royal duty and dedication. Eugenie found herself drawn to read more of the personal messages, despite the emotional toll each one took. There were letters from military families expressing gratitude for support during difficult times, notes from children who had been inspired by charitable work, and simple expressions of sympathy from families who understood the pain of loss. Each message felt like a small piece of comfort, but also like another weight added to her already heavy heart. The prince watched as his daughter's breathing became more shallow, and her hands began to tremble slightly as she bent to read yet another touching tribute. He could see that she was fighting a battle between her desire to honor every person who had taken the time to leave flowers and her own need to process her grief away from public scrutiny. Other family members were experiencing their own emotional challenges as they moved through the flowers. The younger generation, in particular, seemed to struggle with the formal requirements of such public mourning. They had grown up in the spotlight, but this level of intense scrutiny during a time of personal loss was testing their ability to maintain the stoic dignity expected of their positions. The media presence was constant but respectful, with photographers capturing the family's journey through the tributes while maintaining an appropriate distance. The images being taken would become part of history, documenting not just the public response to tragedy, but also the very human way the royal family dealt with their grief under the intense pressure of public attention. As the afternoon wore on, Andrew began to position himself more protectively near his daughter. He could sense that she was approaching the limit of what she could endure while maintaining her composure. His own grief was set aside as his paternal instincts took over, focusing entirely on providing whatever support she needed to get through the remainder of the public viewing. The flowers themselves seemed to tell the story of a nation in mourning. Elaborate formal arrangements from organizations and institutions stood alongside simple bouquets, clearly chosen with limited resources but unlimited love. Children's drawings were carefully placed among expensive floral displays, creating a democratic tapestry of grief that transcended social and economic boundaries. Eugenie paused at a display that included photographs and personal mementos alongside the flowers. The intimate nature of these tributes struck her particularly hard, as she realized that people had chosen to share their most precious memories and possessions as part of their farewell. The generosity and love, represented by these gifts, was almost too much to bear. The princess's voice began to waver as she thanked members of the public who had waited hours for the opportunity to express their condolences in person. Each interaction required her to summon strength she was not sure she possessed, but her sense of duty and gratitude for the public support kept her moving forward through the increasingly difficult afternoon. Andrew could see the toll the day was taking on all the family members, but his primary focus remained on Eugenie. As her father, he felt responsible for protecting her while also respecting her determination to fulfill her obligations. The balance between parental concern and royal protocol created its own form of stress as he watched his daughter struggle with emotions that threatened to overwhelm her. The late afternoon sun began to cast longer shadows across the flower displays, creating a more somber atmosphere as the day progressed. The beauty of the tributes remained unchanged, but the emotional weight of viewing them for hours had created a cumulative effect that was becoming increasingly difficult for the family to bear while maintaining their public composure. The breaking point came suddenly and without warning, as emotional breaking points often do. Princess Eugenie had been reading a particularly touching letter from a young girl who had been inspired to volunteer at a local charity after meeting the royal family at a public event. The letter detailed how that brief encounter had changed the girl's entire perspective on service and giving back to the community. As Eugenie finished reading the heartfelt words, written in careful cursive handwriting and decorated with small hearts and flowers, the weight of everything finally became too much to bear. The accumulation of grief, exhaustion, public pressure, and overwhelming gratitude crashed over her like a wave. Her carefully maintained composure cracked, and tears began to flow freely down her cheeks. Prince Andrew was beside her in an instant, his paternal instincts overriding any consideration of royal protocol or public appearance. He placed his arm gently around his daughter's shoulders, creating a protective barrier between her and the watching crowd. His own eyes filled with tears as he witnessed his daughter's pain, but his focus remained entirely on providing the comfort and support she desperately needed. The moment was captured by photographers, but rather than feeling intrusive, the image would later be seen as a powerful testament to the genuine humanity of the royal family. In that instant, they were not representatives of an institution or symbols of duty, but simply a father comforting his grieving daughter in a moment of overwhelming emotion. Other family members noticed the situation and began to subtly position themselves to provide additional privacy and support. Without any spoken communication, they formed a small circle of protection around Eugenie and Andrew, allowing them the space they needed while still acknowledging the public's presence and the importance of the tribute viewing. The crowd of onlookers responded with remarkable sensitivity to the display of raw emotion. Rather than pressing closer or calling out, they seemed to collectively understand that they were witnessing something deeply personal and important. Many were moved to tears themselves, recognizing in Eugenie's breakdown the same grief they had been feeling since news of the loss had been announced. Andrew spoke quietly to his daughter, his words inaudible to others but clearly offering comfort and reassurance. His years of experience dealing with public scrutiny had taught him how to provide support while maintaining dignity, but in this moment, his role as a father took precedence over everything else. He guided her slightly away from the most intense area of viewing, seeking a quieter spot where she could regain her composure. The princess leaned into her father's support, grateful for his presence and strength during her moment of vulnerability. The physical comfort of his embrace reminded her that despite all the public obligations and royal protocols, she was still his daughter, and he would always be there to protect her when she needed it most. The breakdown lasted only a few minutes, but it felt like much longer to those experiencing it. Eugenie's tears were not just for the immediate loss they were mourning, but for the overwhelming realization of how deeply the public had been affected and how much love and support was being offered during this difficult time. The magnitude of responsibility and gratitude was almost too much to process. As she began to collect herself, Eugenie was struck by the kindness of the strangers around them who were pretending not to notice her tears, giving her the privacy to grieve while still showing their support through their continued presence. The British public's instinctive understanding of when to offer space while still showing care was a comfort she had not expected but deeply appreciated. Prince Andrew remained close as his daughter wiped her eyes and prepared to continue with their viewing of the tributes. He could see that the emotional release had actually helped her in some way, allowing her to acknowledge her grief rather than constantly fighting against it. The pretense of perfect composure had been exhausting, and this moment of authentic emotion had provided some relief. The family security detail had handled the situation with professional discretion, ensuring that the moment remained as private as possible while still allowing the royal family to fulfill their public obligations. Their experience with managing sensitive situations was evident in how smoothly they facilitated the continuation of the tribute viewing while respecting the emotional needs of the family. Other members of the public who were present seemed to understand instinctively that they had witnessed something important and meaningful. Rather than treating it as a spectacle, they responded with increased expressions of support and sympathy, recognizing that the royal family's grief was genuine and deeply felt. The afternoon light continued to fade as they resumed their slow progress through the flower displays. Eugenie's emotional release had somehow made the remaining tributes easier to bear, as if acknowledging her grief had given her permission to feel the full weight of the loss, while also appreciating the incredible outpouring of love and support from the public. Andrew stayed close to his daughter for the remainder of the viewing, ready to offer support if she needed it again. His protective presence was a constant source of comfort, reminding her that no matter how public their lives might be, family bonds and parental love remained the most important sources of strength during difficult times. The witnesses to this moment of vulnerability would later speak of how it had deepened their respect and affection for the royal family, seeing them not as distant figures of authority, but as real people dealing with real grief in the most human way possible. The early evening brought a different quality of light to the flower displays, casting everything in a golden glow that somehow made the tributes even more poignant. Princess Eugenie had found a new strength after her emotional breakdown earlier in the afternoon. The release of tears had seemed to clear away some of the overwhelming pressure she had been carrying, allowing her to approach the remaining tributes with renewed purpose and gratitude. Prince Andrew noticed the change in his daughter's demeanor and felt a mixture of pride and relief. She had weathered the storm of her emotions while maintaining her dignity and connection to the public who had come to show their support. Her ability to continue despite her grief demonstrated the resilience that had been instilled in her through years of royal training, but more importantly, it showed her natural strength of character. The crowds had changed throughout the day as well. The afternoon brought families with children who had been released from school, eager to participate in this historic moment of national mourning. Their presence added a different dimension to the gathering, as young voices asked questions about the flowers and the significance of the royal family's presence among the tributes. One particularly moving encounter occurred when a small girl, no more than 6 years old, approached the barriers with a single daisy clutched in her tiny fist. She had picked it from her grandmother's garden specifically to contribute to the memorial, and her earnest desire to add her flower to the thousands already displayed touched everyone who witnessed the gesture. Eugenie knelt down to receive the flower personally, and the interaction between the princess and the child became one of the most meaningful moments of the entire day. The little girl's innocent understanding of loss and her desire to help in the only way she knew how represented the purest form of the sympathy that had been flowing toward the royal family since the tragedy had occurred. The conversation between the princess and the child was brief but profound. The little girl explained that her grandmother had told her flowers could carry messages of love to people who had died, and she wanted to make sure her message reached the right place. Eugenie's response, spoken with gentle kindness despite her own exhaustion, assured the child that her flower would indeed carry her message of love. Prince Andrew watched this interaction with deep emotion, seeing in it both the innocence of childhood and the wisdom that sometimes comes from the mouths of babes. The child's simple understanding of grief and comfort provided a perspective that all the formal protocols and official responses could not match. Her presence reminded everyone present of the universal nature of loss and the basic human desire to offer comfort in times of sorrow. The media captured this moment as well, but the photographers seemed to understand its special significance and approached it with particular sensitivity. The images would later become some of the most cherished from the entire day, representing the connection between the royal family and the youngest members of the public they served. As the evening progressed, the family began to encounter more organized groups who had traveled significant distances to pay their respects. Veterans organizations, charitable groups, and community organizations had arranged their own floral tributes and had waited patiently for the opportunity to present them personally to the royal family members. These interactions required a different kind of energy from Eugenie and the other family members. Each group had their own stories to share about how their lives had been touched by royal patronage, charitable work, or public service. Listening to these accounts while managing their own grief required a delicate balance of personal emotion and professional obligation. Andrew served as a buffer for his daughter during these more formal interactions, stepping forward to engage with group representatives when he sensed that Eugenie needed a moment to collect herself. His years of experience with public engagements allowed him to maintain appropriate conversation and acknowledgement while giving his daughter the space she needed to process her emotions. The princess found that hearing these stories of positive impact actually provided some comfort in the midst of her grief. Learning about the lasting effects of charitable work and public service reminded her that loss, while devastating, was not the end of a story, but rather a transition point that could inspire others to carry on important work and maintain meaningful connections. The late afternoon sun created long shadows that stretched across the flower displays, giving the entire scene an almost ethereal quality. The beauty of the setting, combined with the overwhelming evidence of public affection, created moments of unexpected peace amidst the ongoing grief. Other royal family members had their own encounters and challenges throughout the day, but they remained aware of each other's emotional state and ready to offer support when needed. The shared experience of public mourning while dealing with private grief created bonds and understanding that would extend far beyond this single day of tribute viewing. As the official viewing time began to wind down, the family members gathered together for a final walk through the displays. This last tour was more contemplative, allowing them to take in the full scope of what the public had created in response to their loss. The sea of flowers had become not just a memorial, but a testament to the enduring connection between the royal family and the people they served. As the day drew to a close, Princess Eugenie stood quietly at the edge of the vast flower display, taking in the full magnitude of what lay before her. The thousands of tributes stretched out in every direction, creating a landscape of love and sympathy that would remain etched in her memory forever. The emotional journey of the day had transformed her understanding of public service and the deep connections that existed between the royal family and the people of the nation. Prince Andrew remained beside his daughter, his presence a constant source of strength throughout what had been one of the most challenging days of her life. The afternoon's emotional breakdown had actually strengthened their bond, reminding both of them that beneath all the protocol and public responsibility, the most important relationships were those of family and unconditional love. The setting sun cast a warm glow over the entire scene, and the earlier crowds had thinned to a more manageable number of people who seemed content to simply be present in this space of collective mourning and remembrance. The atmosphere had shifted from the intense emotion of the afternoon to something more peaceful and reflective. Eugenie found herself thinking about the individual stories she had heard throughout the day. Each person who had approached with flowers or messages had carried their own experiences of loss, hope, and connection to the royal family. These personal encounters had made the abstract concept of public service tangible and immediate in a way that formal engagements never could. The princess realized that her tears earlier in the day had not been a sign of weakness, but rather a natural and necessary response to the overwhelming evidence of love and support that surrounded them. The public had not expected perfect composure from the royal family during this time of grief. Instead, they had appreciated the authentic display of emotion and humanity. Prince Andrew reflected on his role as both a father and a public figure throughout the day. Watching his daughter navigate such intense emotions while fulfilling her public obligations had filled him with immense pride. Her strength and grace under pressure had demonstrated the values he had tried to instill in her, while her moments of vulnerability had shown her essential humanity. The other family members began to gather for their final departure from the tribute site. Each had been affected differently by the day's experiences, but all carried with them a renewed understanding of their connection to the public and the responsibility that came with their positions. The logistics of concluding such an emotionally charged public event required careful coordination. The security team, palace officials, and local authorities worked together to ensure that the family's departure will be handled with appropriate dignity while allowing the public to continue their own process of paying respects to the memorial. As they prepared to leave, Eugenie took one last look at the sea of flowers and felt a complex mixture of gratitude, sadness, and hope. The day had been exhausting and emotionally draining, but it had also been profoundly meaningful. The connection she had felt with members of the public who had shared their stories and offered their support would influence her approach to royal duties for years to come. The princess understood now that public service was not just about formal events and charitable patronage, but about being present for people during their most difficult moments and allowing them to be present for the royal family during theirs. The reciprocal nature of this relationship had been made clear through the day's experiences. Prince Andrew guided his daughter toward their waiting transportation, but their departure was unhurried and peaceful. They had fulfilled their obligations to view the tributes and acknowledge the public support, but more importantly, they had honored their own need to grieve while surrounded by expressions of love and sympathy. The drive away from the tribute site was quiet, with both father and daughter lost in their own thoughts about the day's experiences. The emotional intensity of the mourning seemed like it had occurred days rather than hours ago. Such was the transformative power of what they had witnessed and experienced. The flowers would remain for several more days, allowing additional members of the public to visit and pay their respects. Eventually, they would be carefully collected and composted, but the messages and memories they represented would be preserved as part of the historical record of this moment in royal and national history. For Eugenie, the day had marked a turning point in her understanding of her role within the royal family and her relationship with the public. The vulnerability she had shown and the support she had received had created connections that transcended the usual boundaries between royalty and subjects. Prince Andrew knew that his daughter had grown and changed through this experience in ways that would benefit her throughout her future public service. The strength she had shown while processing genuine grief in the public demonstrated a maturity and authenticity that would serve her well in the years to come. As they returned to the privacy of their family residences, both carried with them the knowledge that they had been part of something larger than themselves. The day of viewing tributes had become a shared experience of national mourning that had brought together people from all walks of life in a common expression of love, loss, and hope for the future.